Rancher lived alone with his animals until a traveler offered him a place to stay only if they share. The ranch was located at the edge of a quiet valley, surrounded by tall hills and forests that seemed to stretch endlessly. The land was wide and open, with rolling green pastures where his animals grazed freely. For Henry, this ranch was more than just a home, it was his entire world. He had grown up here, inheriting the land from his father, and over the years he had built everything himself. The fences, the barns, the small wooden house that sat near the center of the property, all were his work, each nail and plank a mark of his dedication. Life on the ranch was simple, but it was far from easy. Henry woke up every day before sunrise. He would step outside his wooden cabin, feeling the cool morning air on his face, and take a deep breath. The valley was always quiet at this hour. Birds sang softly, and sometimes he could hear the distant call of a hawk circling above the hills. Mist often hung low over the pastures, making the world look magical for a few fleeting moments each morning. He liked to stand there for a while, listening to the gentle sounds of nature before the hard work of the day began. His routine was steady and precise. First, he would feed the animals. The cows needed fresh hay and water, the chickens needed their grain, and his horses waited patiently for him to clean their stalls and give them food. Then came the chores that kept the ranch in order, checking fences, repairing gates, and making sure the barn doors were secure. Henry did everything himself. Over the years, he had learned to fix broken machinery, mend torn fences, and even treat minor injuries for his animals. He had no neighbors close enough to ask for help, and he had grown used to relying entirely on himself. Despite the hard work, Henry enjoyed his life. He loved the animals deeply. His old dog, Rusty, was his most faithful companion. Rusty had been with him for more than a decade and knew the ranch as well as Henry did. The dog would follow him everywhere, from the barn to the fields, and would sit quietly by his side while Henry worked. The horses were also more than just livestock. They were friends. Henry could often be found talking to them, telling them about his day, or simply sharing a quiet moment as he brushed their coats. In a way, these animals were his family. Evenings were his favorite time. After a long day of work, Henry would sit on the porch of his cabin, sipping a cup of hot tea. The sky would turn golden and pink as the sun began to set behind the hills. Shadows stretched across the pasture, and the valley seemed to hold its breath in that quiet moment. Sometimes he would watch the clouds slowly drift across the sky, or listen to the gentle sounds of the river that ran along the edge of his property. The world felt peaceful and right. It was in these moments that Henry felt a deep connection to the land, a sense that he was exactly where he was meant to be. But life on the ranch was not without its loneliness. Henry had grown accustomed to being alone. He had no family nearby, and most townspeople saw him as the quiet, solitary rancher who preferred animals to people. Sometimes, during the long winter months, the isolation felt heavy. Snow would blanket the pastures, and the wind would whistle through the trees. Henry would spend hours in his cabin, reading old books or repairing tools. During these times, he would often talk to Rusty or hum softly to himself. The animals provided comfort, but they could not replace human companionship entirely. He missed the laughter and conversation of friends, the small moments of connection that others seemed to take for granted. Henry's days were full of small joys that others might overlook. He loved watching the first light of dawn spill across the valley, making the grass glisten with dew. He enjoyed the simple satisfaction of fixing a fence or seeing a sick animal recover under his care. He took pride in the beauty of the ranch, from the blooming wildflowers in spring to the golden leaves in autumn. Even the quiet moments of solitude held meaning for him, moments where he could think, dream, and reflect without interruption. Despite the peace, there was always a part of Henry that wondered about the world beyond the hills. He had heard stories from travelers who passed through the nearby town, stories of cities bustling with life, of new people and opportunities. Sometimes he imagined what it would be like to meet new friends, to hear stories from distant lands, or to share a meal with someone who was not an animal. But then he would look around at his ranch, at the animals and the land he loved, and he would realize that this was his home and he was happy here. The thought of leaving, even for a short time, seemed impossible. One late afternoon, as Henry was finishing his chores, he noticed movement near the edge of the property. A figure was walking slowly along the dirt path leading to the ranch. Henry squinted against the sun and saw a young man carrying a small bag, looking tired and worn. He seemed lost, unsure of where he was. Henry felt a twinge of surprise. Visitors were rare in these parts, and he had not expected anyone to find their way to his isolated ranch. The man's clothes were dusty, and he walked with the slow, heavy steps of someone who had been traveling for many days. Henry called out to him, and the man paused, relief washing over his face. "Hello," the traveler said softly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been walking for days and I need a place to rest. Can I stay here tonight?" Henry studied him carefully. He didn't know this stranger, and caution was natural. But there was something genuine in the traveler's eyes, a mixture of exhaustion and hope that Henry recognized. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "You can stay, but you'll need to help with the chores if you want food and shelter." The traveler's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I'll do anything, I promise." Henry felt a flicker of curiosity. For decades he had lived alone, and the idea of having another person here was strange. Yet, as he watched the man set down his bag and begin to take in the sights of the ranch, Henry felt something stir inside him, a quiet excitement at the thought of sharing his home, even if only temporarily. As night fell, Henry prepared a simple meal and they ate together in the small cabin. Rusty curled up at Henry's feet, keeping one eye on the newcomer. The traveler, whose name was Leo, spoke little at first, but Henry could see the relief in his eyes. For Henry, the presence of another person in the cabin felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. But there was also a warmth, a reminder that even in a life built on solitude, human connection could still find its way in. That night Henry lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch, the wind rustling the leaves, the soft breathing of Rusty, and the occasional low call of a cow. He thought about the traveler and what his presence might mean. Would life on the ranch change with Leo here? Would the peaceful solitude he had known for so long be disrupted? Or could this stranger become a friend, someone who might share the burdens and joys of ranch life? For the first time in many years, Henry allowed himself to wonder what new experiences might come, what lessons he might learn, and how the rhythm of his life might shift. As the moon rose high above the valley, casting silver light over the pastures, Henry drifted to sleep with a sense of quiet anticipation. The ranch remained the same in appearance, but inside Henry, something had changed. A door long closed had begun to open, a door that might lead to companionship, shared work, and new stories. The quiet ranch, the animals, and Henry's steady routines were all still there. But now, a visitor had arrived, and with him, the possibility of something new and unexpected. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the valley, casting a golden glow across the pasture. Henry was already awake, as usual, stepping outside his cabin to take in the fresh air. Rusty, his loyal dog, ran ahead, eager for the day to begin. The animals stirred as well, stretching and grazing, unaware that a new presence would soon join their daily routine. Henry glanced toward the small wooden house where Leo had spent the night. The traveler was already awake, standing by the window and looking out at the vast landscape. He seemed unsure, almost hesitant, but his eyes reflected curiosity and a quiet excitement. Henry called him over and Leo walked toward him slowly. "Good morning," Henry said, his voice calm but firm. If you're going to stay here, there are rules. You'll help with the animals, help with chores, and respect this place. Otherwise, you'll need to move on. Leo nodded eagerly. I understand. I can do whatever you ask. I just need a safe place for a while. Henry studied him, noticing the honesty in his eyes. He could see that Leo was serious and willing to work, not someone looking for an easy handout. That gave Henry a measure of comfort. The first task of the day was feeding the animals. Henry handed Leo a bucket of grain for the chickens and another for the pigs. He explained patiently how each animal needed attention, how some were more delicate than others, and what signs to watch for in case they were sick or hungry. Leo listened carefully, nodding and repeating the instructions in his mind. As they walked across the pasture, Henry observed him, noticing how careful he was not to startle the animals. For a man who had been traveling alone for days, Leo handled himself better than Henry expected. Despite this, the work was not easy for Leo. He struggled to lift heavy bales of hay and occasionally tripped over uneven ground. Henry found himself sighing more than once, but also resisting the urge to take over. He knew that if Leo was to stay, he needed to learn. Mistakes were part of the process, and patience would be necessary on both sides. Henry reminded himself that teaching someone else to care for a ranch was different from simply doing the work himself. It required guidance, encouragement, and sometimes a little firmness. By mid-morning, they had finished feeding most of the animals, but Henry could see that Leo was tired. Sweat dripped down his face, and his hands were sore from the rough work. Yet there was determination in the young man's expression. He did not complain, and he kept trying to do things right. Henry felt a strange mix of pride and relief. Perhaps having another person on the ranch would not be as disruptive as he had feared. Maybe, he thought, this could even bring some life back into the quiet routines he had followed for so many years. After breakfast, Henry decided it was time to show Leo the more challenging parts of ranch life. They walked toward the far pasture where the horses were kept. Henry explained how to groom them, how to approach them calmly, and how to read their body language. A horse can tell how you're feeling before you even speak, Henry said. If you're nervous, they'll know. If you're patient, they'll trust you. Leo listened intently, running his hands along the horses' coats as Henry guided him. At first, the horses were wary, but Leo's gentle approach soon won them over. Henry couldn't help but smile. Yet, not everything went smoothly. At one point, a young colt kicked suddenly, startled by a loud noise from the barn. Leo jumped back, nearly losing his balance. Henry quickly stepped in to calm both the horse and the traveler. Patience, he said firmly but kindly. You can't rush them. They need time to adjust, just like you do. Leo nodded, breathing heavily but smiling faintly. I understand. I'll be more careful. Henry could see that Leo was learning, and that gave him hope. Throughout the day, Henry observed Leo in other ways too. He noticed how the traveler moved quietly around the ranch, careful not to disturb the smaller animals. He saw how Leo listened, asking questions when he did not understand something, and how he tried to remember each instruction. Slowly, Henry realized that Leo had a genuine respect for the land and the animals, something that many people from the nearby town did not have. This realization eased some of Henry's lingering doubts. Perhaps this visitor could truly become a helpful presence rather than a burden. As the sun climbed higher, they took a short break near the small river that ran along the edge of the property. Henry handed Leo a water bottle and sat down on a flat rock. Leo drank eagerly, his eyes scanning the valley. It's beautiful here, he said softly. I've never seen anything like this. It feels alive. Henry nodded, feeling a swell of pride for his home. It is alive, he said simply, but it's not easy. Life here demands work, patience, and respect. If you're willing to give that, this place can teach you a lot. After the break, they returned to chores. Leo continued helping with minor repairs around the barn and fences. He learned to carry tools, hammer nails, and tighten loose boards. Henry watched him carefully, offering corrections when necessary, but also giving encouragement when Leo succeeded. By the end of the day, the young traveler was exhausted but had a sense of accomplishment. He had learned more in one day than he had in weeks of wandering, and Henry could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Evening approached, and the valley was bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. Henry and Leo prepared a simple dinner together, cooking over the small stove in the cabin. As they ate, they shared stories. Leo spoke of his travels, of towns and cities he had seen, and of the long road that had brought him to this ranch. Henry listened quietly, occasionally asking questions. It was the first real conversation he had had with another person in years, and he found himself enjoying it. There was a rhythm to their interaction, a growing connection that neither had expected. After dinner, they walked outside to check on the animals one last time before nightfall. The cows were settling in, the horses were calm, and Rusty ran happily around them, as if approving of the new companion. Leo laughed as the dog chased his tail, and for the first time in many years, Henry felt the warmth of shared laughter echo across the ranch. It was a small thing, but it made the ranch feel less lonely, less silent. Later, as they sat by the fireplace, Leo thanked Henry for allowing him to stay. "I know I'm new here and I don't want to overstep," he said earnestly. "I'll work hard and I'll do my best to respect your home." Henry looked at him and nodded. "You've done well today. You've got more patience and care than I expected. We'll see how tomorrow goes, but for now, rest. You've earned it." Leo smiled, a mixture of relief and gratitude, before retreating to his small corner of the cabin to sleep. That night Henry lay in bed, listening to the quiet of the ranch. The wind rustled through the trees, the animals breathed peacefully, and somewhere nearby, Leo slept for the first time in days without worry. Henry felt a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that something had shifted. The ranch was no longer just his. There was another presence now, someone learning, struggling, and slowly becoming part of this quiet, self-contained world. For Henry, this was both unfamiliar and comforting. He thought about the day's events, the mistakes Leo had made, the lessons he had learned, the laughter and the hard work. Henry realized that teaching someone else was different from doing things alone. It required patience, understanding, and a willingness to share a part of his life that had been private for decades. Yet, there was a joy in it, a sense that life could be richer when shared. Henry had spent so many years alone, focused on survival and routine, that he had forgotten the quiet happiness that companionship could bring. As he drifted to sleep, Henry felt a renewed sense of purpose. He did not know how long Leo would stay, nor did he know what challenges the future might bring. But for the first time in many years, he felt that the ranch, his beloved home, could hold more than just solitude. It could hold stories, laughter, and perhaps even friendship. The valley remained as peaceful as ever, the animals content and safe, but something inside Henry had begun to change. A small door had opened in his heart, a door that promised that sharing his life, even in small ways, could bring unexpected joy and growth. The next few days on the ranch brought a new rhythm. Henry and Leo had begun to understand each other, and the early awkwardness of their first meeting was slowly fading. Leo had started to move more confidently around the animals, anticipating their needs before Henry even had to instruct him. He learned the patterns of the cows, which were gentle and predictable, and which of the horses were more sensitive and required careful handling. Each success, no matter how small, brought him a quiet satisfaction, and Henry began to see that the young traveler had a natural connection with animals that even he, after so many years, admired. But just as life seemed to settle into a steady routine, a challenge arrived that neither Henry nor Leo could ignore. One morning, as Henry checked the fences along the far pasture, he noticed that a section had been damaged. The wooden posts were broken, and the wire had been twisted and pulled loose. Henry's brow furrowed in concern. He knew that if the fence was not repaired quickly, the animals could escape or be endangered by predators in the nearby forest. He called Leo over and together they examined the damage. "This will take a lot of work," Henry said, his voice serious. "We need to replace the posts and reattach the wire. It won't be easy, but it has to be done today. The animals can't be left unprotected." Leo nodded without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly. His eyes reflected determination, and Henry realized that the young man was beginning to understand the responsibility that came with life on the ranch. They set to work immediately. Henry lifted the heavy wooden posts with practiced ease, while Leo tried to imitate him, struggling under the weight. Sweat poured down their faces, and their hands were scratched and bruised by rough wood and wire. The sun climbed higher in the sky, hot and unrelenting, but neither man stopped. Henry gave instructions, showing Leo how to drive the posts into the ground, secure them with rope, and stretch the wire tight enough to keep the animals safe. Leo followed carefully, sometimes fumbling, sometimes succeeding, but always learning. By midday, the section of the fence was partially repaired, but a sudden gust of wind blew through the valley, making the wire sway dangerously. A young calf had wandered too close to the damaged fence, and for a moment Henry feared it might escape. He called out quickly, and Leo responded just in time, gently guiding the calf back to safety. Henry watched him, pride mixing with relief. The traveler had proven himself capable, not just willing. He could be trusted with the animals, even in challenging situations. After lunch, they continued the repairs, working side by side in a quiet rhythm. The valley was filled with the sounds of their labor, the hammering of nails, the rustling of the wind through the grass, and the occasional low call of a cow. Leo began to notice things that Henry had taken for granted: the way the soil held the posts firmly, the way the wire needed to be twisted just right, and how the animals reacted to changes in their surroundings. He realized that running a ranch was not simply about feeding animals or fixing fences. It was about understanding the land, the creatures, and the delicate balance between them. As the day wore on, Henry decided to teach Leo another important skill: reading the weather. He explained how to look at the clouds, the wind, and even the behavior of the animals to predict storms or changes in temperature. "A rancher has to be prepared," he said. "Nature doesn't wait for us. If a storm comes and you're not ready, it can destroy weeks of work in a single night." Leo listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that ranch life demanded constant attention, vigilance, and an awareness of the world that went beyond human concerns. By late afternoon, the fence was finally secure. Both men were tired, their clothes soaked with sweat, their hands sore, but there was a sense of accomplishment between them. They stepped back to admire their work, watching as the animals grazed safely in the pasture. Henry nodded approvingly at Leo. "You did well today. You didn't give up even when it was hard. That's important here. Life on the ranch isn't always easy, but if you're willing to work, it can be very rewarding." Leo smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction that came from contributing something meaningful. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, a storm began to form in the distance. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind picked up, carrying a chill that hinted at rain. Henry knew they needed to secure everything else before the storm hit. Together, they moved the horses to the barn, checked that the cows were safely in their enclosure, and made sure the chickens were protected in their coop. Leo worked quickly, following Henry's instructions and thinking ahead to prevent any potential problems. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility that came with caring for a ranch, and he handled it with courage and focus. As the storm arrived, heavy rain began to fall, accompanied by strong gusts of wind. the valley filled with the sounds of rain hitting the roof of the barn and the distant rumble of thunder. Henry and Leo stayed inside, checking on the animals every few minutes. Rusty ran from stall to stall, making sure everyone was safe, and the two men worked together to calm frightened animals. Henry watched Leo closely, seeing how the young man handled pressure and uncertainty. He realized that this shared experience was teaching them both something important, not just about ranch life, but about trust, patience, and reliance on one another. Hours passed, and the storm finally began to subside. The rain left the valley glistening and refreshed, the pastures sparkling with droplets, and the animals safe and calm. Henry and Leo, exhausted but satisfied, sat together in the barn, listening to the steady drip of water from the roof. For the first time, Henry felt a true sense of partnership with another person. This was more than just sharing chores. It was sharing responsibility, challenges, and victories. He realized that having Leo here was changing the ranch, bringing life and energy that had been missing for so many years. Over the next few days, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Henry and Leo continued to work side by side, learning from each other and growing more comfortable with their shared responsibilities. Leo became more confident with the animals, more skilled with tools, and more attuned to the land. Henry, in turn, discovered a new sense of joy in teaching, guiding, and sharing his knowledge. The once quiet, solitary ranch was slowly coming alive with laughter, conversation, and the quiet satisfaction of teamwork. One afternoon, while repairing a gate, Henry paused and looked at Leo. "You've changed a lot in a few days," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "You're learning fast and you've proven that you can handle more than you thought, but there's still a lot to know. Ranch life isn't just about work, it's about understanding everything around you, from the animals to the weather to the land itself." Leo nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I want to learn. I want to do it right. I don't want to just stay here. I want to belong here, even if it's just for a while." Henry smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Then you're in the right place. You'll learn and I'll teach you. Together, we can make this ranch even stronger than it was before." That night after dinner, they sat by the fireplace, talking quietly. Leo shared more stories of his travels, of cities he had seen and people he had met. Henry listened, fascinated by the world beyond his valley, and in turn, he shared stories of the ranch, of the hard work, the triumphs, and the lessons learned over decades of solitude. For the first time, Henry realized how much he had missed talking to another person, sharing experiences and learning from someone else's perspective. The conversation flowed easily, building a sense of connection that neither had expected. As they prepared for bed, Henry felt a profound sense of contentment. The storm had tested them both. The challenges of the ranch had pushed them to their limits, but in the process, a bond had formed. He realized that life on the ranch did not have to be lonely, that sharing work, responsibility, and even quiet moments could bring a depth of joy he had long forgotten. The valley was still quiet and beautiful, the animals safe and thriving, but now there was also friendship, trust, and a shared purpose filling the air. Henry lay in bed that night, thinking about how much had changed in just a few days. Leo was more than just a traveler now. He was a companion, a helper, and perhaps even a friend. Henry understood that the path ahead would still have challenges, that ranch life would never be easy, but he also understood that sharing the burden made it lighter, and sharing the victories made them sweeter. For the first time in many years, he looked forward to the future with a sense of hope and anticipation, eager to see what the next days would bring. The following week brought new challenges to the ranch. The valley had enjoyed a period of calm and sunshine, but Henry knew that life on a ranch was never predictable. One morning, as he stepped outside, he noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind had picked up, and the animals seemed restless, moving nervously in their enclosures. Henry's instincts immediately told him that a storm was approaching, stronger than the last one. He quickly called Leo over to help prepare the ranch for the impending weather. Leo appeared almost immediately, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "What do we need to do?" he asked, already grabbing tools and rope. Henry appreciated the young man's eagerness, but he also knew that storms could test even the most experienced ranchers. "We have to make sure the fences are strong, the animals are secured, and the barns are reinforced," Henry said. "This storm will be different. We need to work fast but carefully. One mistake could cost us a lot." The day was filled with frantic activity. They moved the horses into the main barn, checked that the cows were safely enclosed, and secured the smaller animals in their shelters. The wind began to howl across the valley, rattling windows and bending the young trees along the pasture. Rain started as a drizzle but quickly turned into a steady downpour, soaking the ground and turning the dirt paths into slippery mud. Henry and Leo worked tirelessly, climbing fences, reinforcing gates, and making sure nothing was left unsecured. At one point, a section of the fence gave way under the force of the wind. A few cows pushed through the gap, frightened by the storm. Henry shouted, and both men ran to guide the animals back to safety. Leo struggled to control one of the larger cows, slipping in the mud, but he refused to let go. With Henry's help, they managed to herd all the animals back into the enclosure, drenched and exhausted, but safe. Henry looked at Leo with a mixture of pride and relief. The young man had proven himself not only willing to work, but capable of facing real danger with calm determination. The storm continued to rage for hours. Lightning flashed across the valley, and thunder rolled through the hills like a giant drum. Henry and Leo stayed close to the barn, checking on the animals and making sure the structure held. Rusty, the old dog, moved between them, offering comfort and company, barking at sudden noises but always returning to their side. Despite the chaos outside, there was a sense of teamwork between the two men. Each instruction Henry gave, each action Leo took, was a step toward protecting the ranch and everything Henry had worked so hard to build. As the night fell, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Henry realized that they would have to endure it together, relying on each other's strengths. He gave Leo a small wooden stool to sit on while he worked on reinforcing a loose gate. "You've done well today," Henry said. "I couldn't have done this alone." Storms like this test us, but they also teach us what we're capable of. Never forget that. Leo nodded, his face wet with rain and mud, exhaustion etched into his features. "I'll remember. I've learned more in these past few days than I could have imagined." Hours passed and the storm began to subside slightly, though the rain continued to pour. The men were soaked to the bone, their clothes heavy with water and mud, but the sense of accomplishment kept them going. They inspected every fence, every gate, and every shelter, making sure nothing was left vulnerable. Henry realized that he had not felt this alive in years. The adrenaline, the responsibility, the shared effort. It was a reminder that life on the ranch was not just about solitude or routine, but about resilience, courage, and trust. When the storm finally began to ease, the valley was transformed. Trees were bent, leaves scattered across the ground, and puddles had formed in every low spot. The animals were safe, tired but unharmed, and the barn and fences had held. Henry and Leo stood side by side, looking at their work. Both men were covered in mud and scratches, but there was a deep sense of pride between them. "We did it," Leo said, his voice filled with relief. Henry nodded. "Yes, and we did it together. That's what matters. Alone, I might have managed, but with you here, we were stronger." Over the next few days, Henry noticed subtle changes in Leo. The young man was more confident, more aware of the animals' needs, and more connected to the land. He woke early without being told, took initiative in chores, and even started noticing problems before Henry pointed them out. For Henry, It was both strange and comforting to see someone take such responsibility. He had spent decades alone, and yet here was someone learning, growing, and contributing in ways that made the ranch stronger. Despite the storm's challenges, there were lighter moments as well. One afternoon, Leo found a small group of wildflowers growing near the edge of the pasture, bright and delicate despite the recent rain. He brought them to Henry, who smiled at the gesture. "Even after a storm, life finds a way," Henry said. "That's what makes this place special. There's always something worth noticing, worth caring for." Leo nodded, realizing that ranch life was not just about work or survival, but also about appreciating the small joys, the animals, the land, and the moments of beauty that made every day meaningful. However, the challenges were far from over. A few days after the storm, a minor injury occurred. One of the cows had cut its leg on a jagged piece of fence, and the wound needed immediate attention. Henry guided Leo through the process of cleaning and bandaging it, explaining each step carefully. Leo's hands were steady, his focus sharp, and Henry realized that the young man had learned quickly. "You're becoming more than just a helper," Henry said quietly. "You're becoming someone I can rely on when things get difficult." Leo felt a surge of pride. For the first time, he truly felt like he belonged on the ranch, not just as a guest, but as a partner. As the days passed, the bond between Henry and Leo deepened. They shared quiet moments in the evening by the fireplace, talking about their pasts, their dreams, and the lessons they had learned from life and the land. Henry shared stories of his childhood, of his father and the lessons he had taught about responsibility, patience, and respect for nature. Leo shared his own journey of the towns he had seen, the challenges he had faced, and the hopes that had carried him to the ranch. Each story brought them closer, building trust and understanding that neither had expected so quickly. Yet, life on the ranch was not only about success and learning, it was also about confronting fears and doubts. One evening, as they prepared for another incoming storm, Leo admitted his anxiety. "I've never faced anything like this before," he said. "I've helped animals before, but never under these conditions. I'm afraid I might make a mistake." Henry placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Fear is natural," he said. "It shows you care, but fear cannot control you. You have to act with patience and courage. And remember, you're not alone. We face this together." Leo nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the reassurance that came from shared effort. When the next storm finally arrived, it was fierce but manageable. The animals were safe, the fences held, and Henry and Leo worked seamlessly together. They moved quickly, anticipating problems and solving them as they arose. For Henry, it was a revelation. Having someone to share both the work and the worry made the experience less isolating and more meaningful. He realized that the true strength of the ranch was not in his skill alone, but in the ability to teach, guide, and rely on another person when challenges arose. By the time the storm passed, the valley was calm once more. The ranch was a little battered, but the animals were unharmed, and Henry and Leo had grown closer through the shared experience. They sat on the porch of the cabin, exhausted but content, watching the sun break through the clouds. "You've grown a lot in a short time," Henry said quietly. "Not just in skill, but in understanding what it means to care for this land and these animals." Leo smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment and belonging he had never experienced before. "I feel like I'm part of something," he said softly. "I finally understand what it means to work together, to protect something bigger than myself." That night, as they settled in for rest, Henry reflected on how much life had changed since Leo had arrived. The once quiet, solitary ranch was now filled with shared responsibility, learning, and trust. The storm had tested them both, revealing strengths, courage, and patience they might not have known they possessed. Henry realized that opening his home to another person had been the right decision. Not only had Leo proven capable, but he had also brought life, energy, and companionship to a place that had long been silent. Henry drifted to sleep with a deep sense of satisfaction. The ranch had survived another storm, the animals were safe, and he had discovered the value of partnership, trust, and shared responsibility. For the first time in many years, he felt that the ranch was not just his own world. It was a shared space where life, learning, and companionship could flourish. The bond between him and Leo had strengthened, and the quiet valley seemed to hold a promise that even in the face of challenges, life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared with someone else. After the storms had passed and the ranch had survived the tests of weather and hard work, life settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and new. Henry woke early as usual. The valley bathed in the soft golden light of dawn, but there was a difference in the air now. The ranch, once a quiet and solitary place, had gained energy, laughter, and companionship. Leo had become an integral part of the daily life here, no longer just a visitor but a partner in every sense. Henry watched him moving across the pasture, feeding the animals with care, and felt a sense of pride he had not experienced in years. The animals themselves seemed to sense the change as well. Rusty, Henry's loyal dog, now had another person to share his attention and play with. The horses nickered as Leo approached, recognizing the gentle touch and calm presence he offered. Even the cows seemed more at ease, grazing calmly under the watchful eyes of both men. It was as if the ranch had breathed a sigh of relief, embracing the partnership that had formed. Henry smiled to himself, realizing that the valley, the animals, and even the land seemed more alive when life was shared. One morning, as they worked together repairing a section of fence, Henry paused to look at Leo. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "In just a few weeks, you've learned more than I thought possible. You're not just helping, you're thinking, noticing things, anticipating problems before they happen. That's what makes a true rancher." Leo smiled, a faint blush on his cheeks. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said sincerely. "You taught me everything and you trusted me to handle things even when I made mistakes. I never thought I'd learn so much so quickly." Henry nodded. "Trust is earned and you've earned it. That's important, not just for the animals or the ranch, but for life itself." As the days went by, Henry began to notice other changes in himself as well. He realized that he had grown accustomed to companionship in ways he had long forgotten. Sharing work with Leo brought not only efficiency but also joy. The quiet moments, once filled with solitude, were now enriched with conversation, laughter, and learning. Henry had spent decades alone, believing that life's rewards came from hard work and patience, but he now understood that some of the deepest satisfaction came from sharing one's life with another person. One afternoon, Henry decided it was time to take Leo beyond the immediate work of the ranch. He led him to the edge of the forest, a place where the hills rolled into a hidden meadow. Here the land was untouched, wildflowers growing in abundance, streams trickling quietly, and birds singing freely. "This is one of my favorite spots," Henry said, breathing in the fresh air. "When life gets hard, when the work feels endless, I come here. It reminds me why I do all of this, the beauty, the peace, the life that continues no matter the hardships." Leo looked around, off filling his eyes. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "I've never seen anything like this. It feels alive in a way cities can never be." Henry smiled. "That's the valley. It has its challenges, but it also has rewards that are worth every effort." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Henry noticed the sense of accomplishment radiating from Leo. The young man had grown in confidence, skill, and understanding. He had learned how to handle the animals, repair fences, anticipate weather changes, and manage the everyday needs of the ranch. But more importantly, he had learned the value of responsibility, patience, and trust. Henry saw a reflection of himself in Leo, not just a helper, but someone who had embraced the lessons of the land and the work, someone who had grown through effort and care. As the weeks turned into months, the partnership between Henry and Leo became stronger. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments by the fireplace, discussing life, the land, and everything they had learned together. Henry found joy in teaching, guiding, and watching Leo grow, and Leo found fulfillment in contributing meaningfully to the ranch, knowing that his efforts mattered. The valley, once quiet and solitary, was now filled with shared purpose, laughter, and the steady rhythm of life lived together. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Leo approached Henry with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how much this place has taught me, not just about ranching, but about life. I never realized how important it is to care for something and someone at the same time. You've shown me that work and life are connected in ways I never understood before." Henry nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "That's true. Life here isn't easy, but it teaches lessons that go beyond the land. Patience, responsibility, respect, and trust, they're all part of living well." Over time, the ranch continued to thrive. The animals were healthier and more content, the land was well cared for, and the structures were maintained with care. Henry and Leo worked seamlessly together, anticipating each other's actions, solving problems as a team, and celebrating small victories. They learned to enjoy the quiet moments as much as the busy ones, watching sunsets, listening to the river, or simply sitting by the barn and sharing stories. The valley, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with life, companionship, and shared purpose. One day, as they repaired a fence together, Henry paused and looked at Leo. "You know," he said, "when you first arrived, I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought my life would stay the same, quiet, lonely, predictable. But you've changed that. You've brought energy, curiosity, and life back to this ranch, and for that I'm grateful." Leo smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "I'm grateful too," he said. "You trusted me when I was just a stranger. You taught me not just how to work, but how to care, how to think, how to live with purpose. I feel like this place is part of me now." The animals seemed to sense the bond between the two men. Rusty followed both of them everywhere. The horses responded to Leo's gentle touch, and even the cows moved calmly through the pasture. Henry realized that the life of the ranch was no longer just his. It belonged to both of them now. The valley, the animals, and the land had become a shared responsibility, a living, breathing connection between people, animals, and nature. As the seasons changed, the ranch grew more vibrant. Spring brought new life. Calves were born, flowers bloomed, and the valley was alive with color and sound. Summer brought long days of hard work, but also evenings filled with laughter and stories shared by the fire. Autumn painted the hills with golden leaves, and winter brought quiet reflection as the snow blanketed the pastures. Through each season, Henry and Leo faced challenges together, learned from mistakes, celebrated victories, and strengthened their bond. One quiet evening, after a long day of work, Henry and Leo sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun dip below the hills. The valley was calm, the animals settled for the night, and the air was filled with a peaceful stillness. Henry felt a deep sense of satisfaction, realizing how much had changed in his life. He had spent years in solitude, believing that life's rewards came from hard work and patience alone. Now he understood that true fulfillment also came from sharing life with someone else, from teaching, guiding, and trusting another person to share the journey. Leo broke the silence, his voice soft but full of meaning. "I've learned so much here, more than I could have imagined. Not just about ranching, but about life, responsibility, and trust. I'll carry these lessons with me forever." Henry nodded, his eyes reflecting pride and gratitude. "And I've learned something too. I've learned that life is richer when it's shared. Solitude can be peaceful, but companionship, trust, and shared effort make it meaningful. This ranch isn't just my home anymore, it's ours." The valley held a sense of completion, a promise of continued life and growth. The animals were safe, the land was cared for, and Henry and Leo had found a partnership built on respect, trust, and shared responsibility. The quiet ranch had transformed into a home filled with life, laughter, and purpose. The challenges they had faced together, the storms, the injuries, the long hours of work, had forged a bond stronger than either could have imagined. In the following weeks, the two men continued to work side by side, anticipating each other's actions and solving problems together. They shared meals, told stories by the fire, and watched sunsets in comfortable silence. Each day brought small joys: a calf taking its first steps, a fence repaired without trouble, a clear sky after a storm. Each moment reinforced the lessons they had learned and the bond they had built. Finally, one evening, as the sun set in a brilliant display of oranges and pinks, Henry reflected on everything that had happened. From the moment Leo had arrived at the gate, weary and uncertain, to the storms, challenges, and lessons they had faced together, the ranch had changed, and so had he. He realized that life's greatest rewards were not just in work or solitude, but in trust, companionship, and shared purpose. Leo had become more than a helper. He had become family, a partner in every sense, and a reminder that life, when shared, could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful than anything Henry had imagined.